On the evening of his 18th birthday, Diluc Ragnvindr, Mondstadt's most promising knight and the heir to its most prestigious winery, watched his own father die. What does it take to break a prodigy? To take the brightest star in a city sky and turn him into its darkest shadow? In the city of Mondstadt, a city of freedom and wine, one name was once synonymous with brilliance, duty, and an almost blinding idealism. Diluc Ragnvindr. He wasn't just another scion of a wealthy family, he wasn't the living embodiment of the Ragnvindr legacy of excellence and public service. Before the age of 18, he was already the pride of the Knights of Favonius, holding the title of the youngest cavalry captain in its long and storied history, a feat that spoke volumes of his unparalleled skill and unwavering dedication. He was a young man who carried the immense weight of his family's prestige, not as a burden, but with an effortless, almost unconscious grace. His path seemed paved with light, guided by a profound and uncomplicated sense of justice, the deep admiration of his father, Krampus, and the respect of the entire city. He was, by all accounts, the perfect knight, a symbol of Mondstadt's martial and moral strength. The Diluc who walks the streets of Mondstadt today is a different person entirely, a phantom living in the shell of the man he once was. By day, he is the master of the Dawn Winery, a reclusive and aloof businessman who, in a stroke of bitter irony, unlike the majority of Mondstadt's residents, professes a deep hatred for alcohol, yet profits immensely from its sale. He is a pillar of the nation's economy, yet is so far removed from its society. But by night, he sheds the skin of civility and becomes a ghost, a myth whispered in terrified tones by criminals in dark alleys, a merciless vigilante known only as the Darknight Hero.
Though the topic on everyone's lips is more of an urban legend than actual news. Even minding my own business, I still end up hearing all about it.
Uh-oh, it's not one of those scary urban legends, is it? If so, Paimon needs to take a deep breath first.
It's not a particularly scary story, no. At least, not for most people. It's the tale of the Darknight Hero.
Huh? Did the bartender just say something?
You weren't even listening? Anyway, the Darknight Hero. It is said that he appears in the middle of the night to fight evil and uphold justice. But to be honest, I don't have much interest in such rumors. Unless, of course, he can help take care of the more belligerent patrons after they've had a few too many. I would happily take that as proof of his existence. I'm told that there have been a handful of sightings, but in the depths of night, no one can get a good look at him. Perhaps that's why he only appears at night. Nevertheless, the sightings confirm that the Darknight Hero is more than just a groundless rumor. Anyway, that's more or less everything I know.
This transformation was not a simple change of heart or a slow descent into cynicism. It was a metamorphosis forged in the crucible of profound loss and tempered in the frozen, unforgiving heart of enemy territory. After his father's death and his faith's collapse, Diluc didn't just mourn, he embarked on a dark pilgrimage, a 4-year odyssey that took him across the breadth of Teyvat and eventually put him in the crosshairs of his sworn enemies, the Fatui. Diluc's character stories, as you progress his friendship level, provide the skeleton of this dark journey, a harrowing hunt that saw him disrupting Fatui operations on a scale so grand that attracted the personal attention of the Harbingers themselves. But Aside from a few tidbits here and there within the game, any official documentation is chillingly silent on the day-to-day horrors he more than likely would have faced. They don't detail the moral compromises required to operate in the shadows of a world far more complex than he ever imagined at an age so young. They don't spell out the psychological toll of a one-man intelligence war against a superpower. Today, I'd like to take some time to piece together the canon-confirmed events of that dark journey, and by examining the fragments of truth we have, I hope you'll join me in fleshing out the spaces between. We'll explore how his time hunting the Fatui, a crusade that pushed him to the absolute brink of his physical and ethical limits, didn't destroy his morality, but instead seems to have reforged it into something colder, harder, and terrifyingly absolute. We'll take a look at how justice for Diluc Roggenvinder stopped being a shared public ideal and became a solitary, brutal, and necessary burden. On the evening of his 18th birthday, Diluc Roggenvinder, Mondstadt's most promising knight and the heir to its most prestigious winery, watched his own father die. He watched as the man who was his greatest inspiration, his moral compass, and his staunchest supporter was consumed by a forbidden, malevolent power, a power he only unleashed in a desperate final act to protect his son. But the true horror, the moment that would define the rest of his life, came moments later. When Diluc looked to his superior, Inspector Eric of the Knights of Favonius, for aid, for justice, for a path forward through his grief, he wasn't met with compassion. He was met with a cold political calculation. An order. Conceal the truth. Lie. Report this agonizing, sacrificial death as a mundane, unfortunate accident, solely to protect the reputation of the Knights of Favonius. In that single, chilling moment, it wasn't just his father that Diluc lost. It was his faith, his world, the very definition of justice he had sworn his life to uphold. What happens when a man's belief in the institutions designed to protect him and his ideals crumbles to dust before his very eyes? He decides to become an institution of one. To understand the man who would later wage a solitary war on the Fatui, we must first intimately understand the boy whose world was so completely and utterly burned to the ground. Diluc Roggenvinder wasn't just another member of the Knights of Favonius, he was its living embodiment, the poster child for its highest ideals. He joined their ranks not merely out of a sense of familial duty, but out of a genuine, burning passion to protect the City of Freedom, a passion instilled in him since birth. At the shockingly young age of 14, he was promoted to cavalry captain, the youngest in history, a testament not just to his prodigious talent with a claymore, but to his strategic mind and unwavering discipline. He was the future of the Knights of Favonius. His father, Krapis Roggenvinder, was a man who dreamed of being a knight himself, but was never chosen by the gods, never granted a vision. Instead of growing bitter, Krapis poured all of his hopes, his dreams, and his considerable resources into his son. For Diluc, nothing brought greater joy or a deeper sense of purpose than making his father proud. His entire existence was a symphony of honor, duty, and a future that seemed as bright and limitless as the Mondstadt sky. He was the son who would achieve the dream the father could not. A story of legacy and love. This idyllic, perfectly structured life was irrevocably shattered on the night of his 18th birthday. While returning to the Dawn Winery, their convoy was ambushed by the monstrous Ursa the Drake, a beast of immense power that had plagued Mondstadt for years. Diluc, the celebrated cavalry captain, for all his skill and courage, found himself terrifyingly outmatched. As the colossal beast closed in for the kill, his father Krampus did the unthinkable. He unleashed the power of a delusion, a man-made, twisted mockery of a vision. This weapon, a product of the very organization Diluc would come to despise, the Fatui, grants its wielder immense power at a catastrophic cost. The ensuing blast of dark energy repelled the monster, but its backlash was immediate and fatal. The delusion consumed its wielder from the inside out, leaving Krampus mortally wounded and writhing in agony. What happens next is grimly, heartbreakingly ambiguous here, and Kaya's character stories strongly suggest that to end his father's unbearable suffering, Diluc, in his first act as a man, had to make an impossible choice in those final desperate moments. Grief is a powerful, disorienting force, but what followed was a betrayal so profound it eclipsed even the pain of his loss. When the Knights of Favonius, led by Inspector Eric, finally arrived on the scene, they found a scene of utter devastation. A dead monster, a dead patriarch, and a grieving son. Diluc, expecting solace and justice from the order he dedicated his young life to, instead received a chilling, pragmatic command. Eric, seeing the evidence of a forbidden delusion, ordered Diluc to lie, to falsify his report, and claim his father's death was a mere unfortunate accident. This lie would bury the inconvenient truth about the delusion, and more importantly, hide the damning fact that the Knights had been too slow, too inept to help one of the city's most important citizens.
Diluc had just come of age. Ursa attacked a trade caravan from the Dawn Winery. It should have been nothing more than a common raid, a tactic they commonly use to incite fear. But the swaggering dragon was driven back by a mere merchant, Diluc's father, Krampus, who paid the ultimate price. News of this defeat did not favor Eric's plan to seize power through terror, so he suppressed the truth, claiming he was doing so to maintain the honor of the Knights. If only I had discovered a moment sooner that he and the doctor were working hand in glove, perhaps I could have stopped everything that followed.
That's not your burden to shoulder alone. Eric hid his true colors well. Up until the incident with Ursa. Even his victims had no idea who was responsible for their suffering.
This was the breaking point. The moment the world fractured. For Diluc, the Knights were supposed to be the incorruptible arbiters of truth and justice. Instead, they revealed themselves as just another political body, more concerned with public relations and covering their own failures than with righteousness. The institution he had placed his absolute faith in was hollow.
Tell us, Captain Pyro, what happened here today?
It was the Abyss Order.
Them again?
I don't know what the devil they're plotting this time. It seems they're performing some initial reconnaissance. Considering that I've proven myself to be one step ahead of them on countless occasions, their persistence is unusual. I assume so, unless you're aware of any other Darknight heroes around these parts. The Knights are, for the most part, an utterly incompetent bunch. I cannot trust them to take this matter over. What's past is past. I would prefer not to discuss it.
The lie they demanded was not just a political expediency, it was a desecration of his father's sacrifice, a final insult to the man who gave everything to protect him. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The very same night, his sworn brother Kaya chose this moment of ultimate vulnerability to confess his own hidden truth. That he was an agent of Conria, sent to Mondstadt with a hidden ulterior agenda, this confession, coming just hours after his father's death and the Knights' profound betrayal, was the final devastating blow. It recontextualized their entire life together as a potential lie. In a storm of rage and grief, the two brothers dueled within the halls of the Dawn Winery. The confrontation was a whirlwind of fire and ice, a clash that ended abruptly with the sudden appearance of Kaya's cryovision and the permanent severing of their bond. Everything Diluc had ever believed in had proven to be false in a single 12-hour period. His father was gone, murdered by a foreign power. His brother was a stranger, an agent from a fallen kingdom. His sacred order was corrupt to its core. And so, with nothing left to anchor him, he made a choice. He walked away from it all. He cast aside his title, formally renounced the Knights of Favonius, and in a move of profound symbolic weight, he set aside his pyrovision, feeling utterly unworthy of its divine favor. This wasn't just a resignation. It was a declaration of war on his former life. If the established systems of justice were broken, corrupt, and self-serving, then he would operate entirely outside of them. His quest was no longer to serve an institution, but to find the source of the evil that had shattered his life, the delusion. He would follow this dark thread wherever it led, not as a knight, but as a man with absolutely nothing left to lose and a singular burning purpose. Freed from the institutional shackles of the Knights of Favonius, Diluc's grief began to cool, sharpening from a wild, roaring bonfire into a single focused point of destructive energy. He now had a tangible target for his rage, the shadowy organization behind the delusion that took his father's life. His personal investigation, fueled by the Roggenvinder fortune, and his own formidable intellect, quickly led him to the Fatui of Snezhnaya, and so began a journey of vengeance that would consume the better part of 4 years of his life. Leaving the sprawling Dawn Winery in the care of his most trusted staff, Diluc embarked on a grim tour of the 7 nations of Teyvat. His mission was simple: hunt down any and all leads related to the Fatui's vast, clandestine network. This was not the work of a detective seeking to bring criminals to justice in a courtroom. This was the work of a saboteur, an insurgent. Officially, it is stated that he single-handedly destroyed numerous Fatui strongholds. This phrasing implies outright, violent destruction, that he was tearing down their operations from the inside out. A one-man wrecking crew fueled by a righteous, all-consuming anger. He was dismantling their infrastructure, disrupting their supply lines, and extracting intelligence by any means necessary. Now, let's pause to consider the profound shift in his moral compass that this required. As a Knight of Favonius, Diluc operated within a strict, honor-bound code of conduct. There were rules of engagement, a respect for due process, a clear line between right and wrong. Now, all of that was gone. In its place was a simpler, more brutal doctrine. The Fatui were the enemy, the source of the world's decay, and they needed to be stopped permanently. His methods were no longer those of a peacekeeper, but of a warrior. Infiltration, interrogation, sabotage, and the systematic dismantling of enemy infrastructure became his new lexicon of justice. He was no longer arresting criminals to be judged by others. He was eliminating threats, acting as judge, jury, and executioner in the shadows. This 4-year period marks the methodical hardening of his morality. He learned to operate in the gray zones of the world, a place where the clear-cut ethics of his youth were a dangerous liability. He began to value results over procedure, efficacy over honor. Justice, once an abstract ideal tied to law and order, became intensely personal. It was about avenging his father, yes, but it was also about preventing others from suffering the same fate at the hands of these hidden manipulators. If that meant breaking international laws, employing ruthless tactics, and becoming a figure of fear, so be it. The ends, for the first time in his meticulously ordered life, now unequivocally justified the means. While not explicitly confirmed in the game, it is a popular and grimly fitting theory that he may have wielded his father's delusion during this time, fighting the Fatui's dark fire with this very same inferno that caused his tragedy. This would represent the ultimate moral compromise, using the symbol of his pain as his primary weapon. A one-man campaign of this scale, this violent and this effective, does not go unnoticed for long. His surgical efficiency and the sheer amount of damage he was causing to their operations across Teyvat eventually drew the attention of the most powerful figures in Snezhnaya, the 11 Fatui Harbingers. These are some of the most powerful and dangerous individuals in the world, each a force of nature in their own right, second only to the Tsaritsa herself. For a lone, stateless actor like Diluc to get on their radar means his actions were not a mere nuisance. They were a significant strategic threat to their nation's goals. The Harbingers decided he had to be stopped, and they took direct action to deal with him personally. This wasn't a squad of skirmishers or a local commander being sent to handle a troublemaker. This was a response from the very top of the Fatui command structure. This fact alone tells you everything you need to know about the staggering effectiveness of Diluc's shadow war. In his quest for vengeance, he had become such a thorn in their side, such a disruptive force, that the maskers of Snezhnaya deemed him worthy of a personal response. His crusade had pushed him far beyond the point of no return. He was no longer just a grieving son settling a personal score. He was a declared enemy of a nation, and his journey was about to enter its most perilous and transformative phase. Every trail of deceit, every shattered Fatui operation, and every piece of tortured intelligence ultimately led toward one place: the frozen, oppressive heartland of the enemy, Snezhnaya. After 3 years of carving a bloody path across the continent, Diluc made the fateful decision to take his war directly to the source. He ventured into the Lion's Den, a nation ruled with an iron fist by the Cryo-Archon, the Tsaritsa, and enforced by the absolute power of her Harbingers. This was no longer a series of proxy wars. This was a direct invasion. By the time his journey brought him to the frost-rimmed borders of the Winter Nation, he was a known high-value target. As Jean's in-game story quest mentions, the Fatui have officially declared him persona non grata. This is a diplomatic term with lethally undiplomatic consequences. It means he wasn't just an outlaw or a criminal. He was an officially designated enemy of the state. Any agent of the Fatui, from the lowest-ranking skirmisher to the most powerful harbinger, would be authorized, and likely handsomely rewarded, to eliminate him on sight. He was a walking target in a nation of hunters, a land where the very air was hostile and every shadow could hide an assassin. This is the environment where Diluc's morality was likely forged into its final hardened form. To survive, he would have had to become as cold, as pragmatic, and as unforgiving as the Snezhnayan winter itself. He would have been forced to learn to think exactly like his enemy, to be preemptive, ruthless, and brutally efficient. We can surmise that this unforgiving environment taught him that true battles are often won not on the open field with a sword, but in the shadows, with secrets, whispers, and carefully laid traps. It would have stripped away any remaining idealism from his youth and replaced it with stark, pragmatic survivalism. His sense of justice, once a bright, warm flame, was being hammered and quenched into a shard of ice. Still sharp and clear, but cold to the touch. While the game gives no day-by-day account of his activities within Snezhnaya, it's clear he was operating completely alone in the most hostile territory imaginable. Survival there would demand a complete and total suppression of the man he once was. The knightly codes of honor that once defined him would be an immediate death sentence. Showing mercy to a cornered agent would be a fatal liability. Trusting anyone would be an act of suicide. But even for someone as exceptionally capable as Diluc, a one-man war against a superpower has its limits. His campaign of righteous fury could only take him so far. His character stories state that his relentless attacks eventually led him into a direct confrontation with the Harbinger's power that he could not possibly win. He was cornered, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by a force far beyond what a single mortal, no matter how skilled, could handle. He was about to be extinguished. His rage, his skill, and even the possible dark power of the delusion had taken him as far as they could. And it wasn't nearly enough. And then, in his moment of absolute defeat, something unexpected happened. Just as he was about to be captured or killed, he was saved. A mysterious observer from the north, an individual who was part of a vast underground intelligence network, intervened. This shadowy organization had been watching Diluc for some time. They approved of his methods, his efficiency, and his goals. They saw the value in his cause. Lying on the brink of death in the Snezhnayan snow, Diluc was shown a new path. His solitary war, a war of passion and brute force, was over. He had learned a powerful, humbling lesson. That rage alone, no matter how righteous, cannot defeat an empire. But in that same moment, he also learned that he wasn't as alone as he thought. There were others fighting the same war, not with fire and fury, but with something far more potent and far more patient: information. Saved from the brink of annihilation in the frozen waste, Diluc was forced to confront his own limitations in the starkest way possible. His passionate 4-year campaign of pure rage had led him not to victory, but to the verge of his own death. The mysterious operative who saved him didn't just offer him his life, they offered him a new ideology, a new methodology for his war. The Observer belonged to a clandestine intelligence network, a group that fought its battles in the shadows with information as their weapon. Acknowledging his own shortcomings, Diluc made a pivotal decision. He laid down the sword of the Avenger and joined them. This marked the end of Diluc the Lone Wolf, the Vengeful Son, and the beginning of Diluc the Strategist, the intelligence operator. For a time, he set aside his deeply personal vendetta to work within this larger, more sophisticated network. This was a profound shift in his worldview. For the first time since his father's death, he was part of a collective again. But this organization was nothing like the Knights of Favonius. This group wasn't bound by bureaucracy, public perception, or a fear of overstepping its authority. It was purely a results-driven machine built on secrets, infiltration, and manipulation. Digging deeper into his lore, you can find it states that he rose through their ranks, honing his existing skills into something far more dangerous and subtle. Working with this network fundamentally changed his philosophy of justice. He learned that true power wasn't just in the strength of one's sword arm, but in the quality of one's information. He learned that a threat could be neutralized long before it manifested, that an enemy operation could be dismantled with a single well-placed piece of intelligence, saving countless lives without a single sword being drawn. His anger, once a wild inferno that threatened to consume him, was now channeled and controlled, becoming the quiet, efficient engine for a more calculated, long-term form of warfare. This experience appears to shift his morality from being purely personal and retributive to being profoundly protective. The goal was no longer just to punish the Fatui for his father's death. It was to protect the innocents of Teyvat from all such hidden evils, proactively and preemptively. After 4 years away, Diluc returned to Mondstadt a completely transformed man. On the surface, he was the new, proper master of the Dawn Winery. He reclaimed his family business, presented a stoic, detached, and even slightly melancholic face to the world. But this was just a carefully constructed cover. The true Diluc now operated exclusively at night, under a new identity whispered about in the city's taverns and alleyways, the Darknight Hero. The contrast between the Darknight Hero and the cavalry captain he once was is stark and absolute. The Knights of Favonius operates in the light, representing public institutional justice, bound by laws and accountable to a chain of command. The Darknight Hero is his complete antithesis. He operates in absolute secrecy, accountable to no one but his own hardened conscience. His justice is swift, uncompromising, and exists entirely outside of the framework of the law he once swore to uphold. He doesn't seek recognition. In fact, he actively despises the theatrical title the public gives him, seeing it as a childish romanticization of his grim work. This reaction shows his complete and utter disillusionment with public approval and institutional authority. His long, dark journey taught him a fundamental, painful truth: that the systems meant to protect people often fail. They are too slow, too tangled in bureaucracy, too afraid of political fallout, or, as in the case of Inspector Eric, too corrupt. He concluded that to truly protect Mondstadt, his home, one had to be willing to do the dirty work that the knights couldn't, or wouldn't, do. His morality became entirely outcome-driven. He will vanquish any threat to his city mercilessly, not because he enjoys violence, but because his experience has taught him that leaving a threat to fester is a far greater evil than the brutal act of eliminating it. His time in the shadows didn't teach him to be evil. It taught him the terrible price of fighting it effectively. It ingrained in him a deep, permanent distrust of political systems and a solemn, unshakable belief that true guardianship is a lonely, thankless, and silent vigil. If you find these deep dives into the hidden corners of Teyvat's lore compelling, and you appreciate the complex stories that shape its characters, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are countless stories waiting to be told, hidden in item descriptions, character dialogues, and ancient texts. Your support makes it possible to uncover them. Let me know in the comments which character's hidden journey you'd like me to explore next. The journey of Diluc Roggenvinder is a story of fire and ice, a narrative of radical transformation. He began as a bright flame of idealism, a prodigy of Mondstadt destined for a glorious, sunlit future. That flame was nearly extinguished by the cold waters of betrayal and loss, only to be violently reborn as a wildfire of pure vengeance that scorched a path across the continent. But it was in the frozen north of Snezhnaya, at the absolute precipice of death and failure, that his final transformation was completed. Snezhnaya did not break Diluc's morality, it cauterized it. It burned away the last vestiges of his youthful naivety and his blind faith in institutions, leaving behind a core of unwavering, hardened, and ice-cold resolve. He went into the darkness not to become a monster, but to learn how to hunt them in their natural habitat, using their own tools against them. He returned to Mondstadt not as a fallen hero, but as a different, more pragmatic kind of protector, one who understands that true justice is not always clean, public, or kind. His profound love for Mondstadt never wavered. That has always been his guiding star, the one constant in his life. What changed irrevocably was his understanding of what it costs to truly defend that love in a world full of shadows. The aloof man who serves wine with a frown at Angel Share and the Darknight Hero who stalks the city's rooftops are two halves of a whole, forged and fused in the fires of tragedy and the frost of reality. He now believes, with every fiber of his being, that for the dawn to come, for others to live safely and freely in the light, someone must be willing to stand watch in the endless dark forever alone. And that is the burden he has willingly, silently chosen to bear.